Every 4 years, the citizens of the United States pause to elect a new president. At its best, the process represents an opportunity for a national debate on issues of broad importance and interest. The economy, national security, healthcare. In today's modern world, with 24/7 news cycles and social media that communicates in real time, the election process can seem like a never-ending soundbite, a campaign blurred by rhetoric, charges, and countercharges. On November 6th, the United States will elect either Barack Obama or Mitt Romney as president. This election, like others that have come before it, are rife with research opportunities. At the University of Maryland, our proximity to Washington, D.C. provides us with a unique view of the political world and with unparalleled research opportunities. In this episode of Research Matters, we focus on our great democracy in action. This is Research Matters, Election 2012.
Welcome to Research Matters. I'm Don Kettle, Dean of the School of Public Policy at the University of Maryland, and your host for this program. Today we've gathered some of the university's most thoughtful experts on something that has preoccupied all of us for months, maybe years, the presidential election. Our panelists are Hank Boyd, the Ralph J. Tizer Teaching Fellow and Associate Chair in the Department of Marketing in the Robert H. Smith School of Business. Hank, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
Glad to be here.
And Francis Lee, a professor in the Department of Government and Politics in the College of Behavior and Social Sciences. Great to have you with us, Francis.
Thank you.
And our first question, Hank, let me turn to you first. Hank Boyd, you really focus on market and consumer behavior. And if there's anything that seems to be the case in presidential campaigns, it's about the message. It's about marketing and getting the candidates out there. Do you have a sense sometimes that marketing effort gets in the way of the communication about issues?
It's a fascinating point you raise. We try to teach our students something called integrated marketing communication. Here's the brand, here's the message, they line up perfectly. That's exactly what you want in politics. What do you stand for? Mitt Romney is saying, I am Mr. Fix-It. So his message is about the economy and jobs. We think of President Barack Obama. He is saying, I am a transformational leader. I'm somebody here who's saying, I'm going to bring in a new day and usher in a new era of politics. And therefore, if you give me a little bit more time, we can turn this corner. Good times are ahead. We just have to keep our heads down and make this thing happen. And of course, he wants to be reelected. No surprises there.
But the one thing that all of us are puzzled by is trying to find a way to try to separate out the sizzle from the steak, trying to understand what are the core issues at the bottom, when are we being snowed, how do we try to separate out the style and the messaging from the underlying questions about the issues and the substance.
I agree with you there. There are certain voters as they get deeper and deeper into the race and they start saying, all right, what are the issues? What do you stand for? What are your planks in your platform? And they will dig, they will go on the internet, they'll look at various sites, gather information, and then make their decision, the informed voter. Mm-hmm. But there's still scores and scores of folks out there that say, well, I'm looking at that sizzle and the sizzle looks good, you'll get my vote, you get my check. So you're always dealing with two audiences that are out there. Those that are informed, where you've got to get your message across, and you can tailor it on a needed basis. And then of course you got the folks out there saying, no, if I believe that you're my type of guy, mm-hmm. if I could have a beer with you, that's enough to get my vote, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Francis Lee, let me bring you into this. You've written award-winning studies on Congress, and you study political institutions. Do you have a sense at all that the branding piece, the messaging piece gets in the way of the actual process of governing, the process of trying to find some way to deal with the big issues that Congress faces?
There's no question that that has been an obstacle for congressional action over the past 2 years, a little longer, but notably over the past 2 years. So much of what Congress has done over the past 2 years has been take votes that for the purpose of sending messages to constituencies, especially mm-hmm. partisan messages. So the House will deliberately pass legislation that it knows cannot go farther, cannot get through the Senate, cannot be signed by the President. The Senate will repeatedly take cloture votes on matters that cannot proceed. Mm-hmm. There's amending campaigns launched by minority party members designed just to embarrass the party in power. It takes up a lot of time in Congress and isn't productive in terms of actually moving towards agreement on many of the outstanding issues. And Congress in the end has produced very little over the past 2 years. We've seen some downward trends in congressional productivity, but the last 2 years really stand out. You have to go back to the 19th century to find a Congress that did as little in terms of lawmaking as the last Congress.
How much of that do you think is due to the fact that we seem to be in a permanent campaign where we never stop having candidates run for office?
I think that's a critical part of the story. I mean, we live in a remarkably party competitive time period. The parties are at parity when it comes to voter identification. About half the electorate that's willing to name a party identification says that it's Democrat, the other half Republican. We had a tied presidential election, and every election we wonder which party is going to control the House or the Senate. And so in that environment, it's no wonder that the parties are constantly looking to staging votes for the purpose of highlighting a message, hoping that after the next elections we'll be in firmer control and be able to do what we really want to do. Why strike a compromise now when after the next elections we'll be in a better position than we are now, or potentially will be?
And we can just keep fighting about it forever.
Right.
And that gets into sort of an interesting puzzle there, Hank, because on the one hand, we have a challenge that everybody complains about: political ads, political advertisements, everybody knows they're being sold candidates. But on the other hand, the fact is that most of us are never going to meet the presidential candidate. We're only going to know them through the brand and through the messaging and through the TV. How has this evolution of modern technology really changed the way that we connect to the people who govern us?
One of the things that's fascinating, you get negative information. People are almost looking for it. We're pre-wired for it. Bad news on someone, let me store that in my mind. Now, you realize the source of where it came from initially, but over time you sort of forget, and it sort of decouples, and all of a sudden you're like, I've got that bad point in my mind, therefore I won't vote for candidate A, I'm going with candidate B. So it is problematic. Negative ads work, that's why they still endure, and even though we say we're going to be more highbrow this time around, we're going to have a better election, we're going to talk about the issues, we're not going to start slinging mud. Well, when it gets tight, as we've seen in this race, they're going to start slinging mud. So that's sort of one of the things you can expect. It's hard to get away from that. So even though we have all the technology, we are still human, and as humans, we still have our limitations.
And we connect with people the only way that we can know them, through what we see on the TV screen.
Absolutely. So you, in some sense, build a relationship vicariously, saying, I think I really know this guy, and therefore, this is the right one. I'm going to check this person off. That's who I'm going to vote for this election cycle.
And one thing I've wondered about sometimes is that, and this was the great genius of Ronald Reagan, at some point you know that there's going to be a national crisis, and you want to have a reassuring face on the other end of that camera.
Ronald Reagan was known as a great communicator, and if you look at some of his speeches, especially the one he gave in 1964, mesmerizing. And so when you saw him, he had such confidence, and I loved that morning in America, when he said, yes, we're having tough times, but I believe in that shining city on the hill. And so everyone else rallied around that and said, yes, we can see it too. Once that happens, you're there. And that's what politics is all about.
And Francis, there's a sense, we as Americans really want to be inspired. We want to be led. We don't like negative campaigning, we say, even though we pay attention to it. But at the same time, it clearly has great impact on the way their institutions operate inside the Beltway. I mean, what kind of prospects does Congress have of being able to find some way to fight through that, to deal with the big issues that we face?
Well, I think there is such a backlog of issues that are unresolved that I think that there'll be some pressure to take some action on a few things after the elections, because the prospect of waiting another 4 years before we deal with these issues, I think is intolerable for a lot of members of both parties at this juncture.
Now for the segment of the show we're calling Grades. We're a university, right? So it's time to put grades on these issues. I'd like to ask each of our panelists to grade on the following subject: how well are the campaigns in this election season communicating about the real issues of this election? Francis, let's start with you. What kind of grade would you give?
Well, I couldn't give a passing grade on on that to either campaign, but in many ways that the question sets a standard that campaigns rarely meet, in that campaigns are mostly targeted at undecided voters. And one thing we know about undecided voters is that they tend not to follow politics very closely and don't know a lot about the issues that that need to be resolved. And so it's difficult to bring them into the conversation in a way that they can really grasp what's at stake. And so, you know, these low information voters, as political scientists like to refer to them, will wind up making choices primarily on valence questions, as in, you know, who's a strong leader? Does this person care about me or not? Are people like me? You know, who do I trust?
But not a passing grade so far.
Right, and so, so those are the messages that the candidates, you know, try to convey, and they tend not to have a lot of issue content. They're more about me as a person.
Hank, what kind of grade would you give?
Well, I'll concur with Francis to some extent, but I'll be a little more generous. I'll give the Romney camp a C. I'll give President Obama's camp a B. And my thinking goes something along the lines that Mitt Romney is really trying to say, here's what I stand for, here's my brand. But because he's flip-flopped over the years and almost just spinning on a dime, that's been very problematic. And so how do you nail it down saying, this is what I stand for? As Francis said, I'm a strong leader. I'm a business guy. I can fix this economy. I can turn things around. Now, he's staying more and more on message as we get closer to the election night. But that's something that should have happened earlier. In the case of the president, he's done some pretty good things, but they didn't get the message out. And so a lot of voters are like, I didn't know you did that. I wasn't aware that that happened. And therefore, you've got to wonder, for a man who in 2008 had such an amazing campaign that they're writing textbooks about it, what happened in 2012? Why didn't that message come across?
Fascinating. Well, this is the kind of issue that researchers here at the University of Maryland spend time finding about, exploring, establishing the new cutting edge, and helping to educate our students and voters as well on the issues that we face. And from branding and policy and from conventions and elections, these eternal election battles set up important puzzles that shape the nation's future. Where it is that we at the university are doing cutting edge work and that fill the university's classrooms and help to educate the nation's future leaders. Helping us understand that question and preparing the nation's citizens who will lead us, that's what this episode of Research Matters is all about. I'm Don Kettle. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you again soon as we bring together more of the university's top flight researchers working on problems that matter to you.